She stood in the grand dining room, her hands trembling slightly as she watched her husband look past her for the 100th time. It was not anger that chilled her. It was the quiet, unbearable certainty that she did not exist to him. The candles glowed softly along the table, the wine sparkled in crystal glasses, and the low hum of conversation from the guests should have made the evening feel warm. But Adelaide Sinclair, the new Duchess of Winthrop, might as well have been a ghost. Across the long table her husband, Gabriel Sinclair, the Duke of Winthrop, listened intently to a viscount's tale. His dark eyes held that distant, brooding quality she had come to know too well. He had not once glanced in her direction during the entire meal, not when she spoke softly to the gentleman beside her, not when a servant spilled a bit of sauce near her plate and she had to quietly manage it, not when the countess beside her openly yawned at her attempt at conversation. Adelaide felt the heat of humiliation creep up her neck, but she kept her face composed. She was good at that now. She had learned that the worst pain was not a shout or a cruel word. It was silence. It was the vast emptiness of being married to a man who had never, not for a single moment, chosen her. She had been married to Gabriel for 14 months. 14 months of polite distance, separate chambers and mornings where he left the breakfast table before she could finish her tea. He had married her out of duty, a promise made to her dying father who had saved his life on a battlefield years ago. That debt of honor had bound him to her, but it had never opened his heart. It was whispered in the drawing rooms of London that the Duke of Winthrop had only ever loved one woman, Lady Marian Covington, the dazzling beauty who had once accepted his proposal, then shattered it to marry a richer marquis. Society said he had never recovered. They said his heart was still buried in that broken engagement, and his young wife was merely a shadow filling a necessary position. Tonight the whisper came alive again. The Viscount Lord Pemberton, too deep in his cups, suddenly lifted his glass and smiled too broadly. "Your Grace, I must say, your estate is magnificent. I remember when Lady Marian used to ride across these grounds. What a vision she was. Do you still keep that old chestnut mare she loved?" The room went silent. Adelaide's fingers tightened around her napkin. She did not look at her husband. She could not bear to see his face soften at the name, as it always did. Gabriel's voice was low, controlled, but there was something jagged beneath it. "The mare was sold long ago." "Ah, a pity. She was a fine creature, but some memories are best left quiet, I suppose." The Viscount chuckled, utterly unaware of the cruelty he had just set loose. Lady Pemberton cleared her throat sharply, but the damage was done. Adelaide rose. She did it slowly, with the grace of a duchess, and managed a serene smile that felt like glass on her lips. "If you will excuse me, I find I am rather tired. Please, enjoy the rest of the evening." She did not wait for permission. She did not look at her husband. She glided from the dining room, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. As she reached the corridor, she heard the conversation resume behind her. He did not follow. He never did. That night, standing alone in her bedchamber, Adelaide stared at her reflection in the mirror. The young woman who looked back at her was not the hopeful bride who had arrived at Winthrop Hall with a trembling smile and a heart full of dreams. That girl had believed that kindness could grow into love. That girl had spent months preparing his favorite meals, learning the estate's tenants by name, and placing fresh flowers in his study only to find them wilting, untouched, the next morning. That girl was gone. Adelaide straightened her spine. She could not force him to see her, but she would not spend the rest of her life dissolving into the wallpaper of his grand house. If she was to be invisible, she would at least be useful. She would pour her heart into the estate and the people who did notice her. She would become a duchess in action, if not in his affection. The next morning, she rose early and walked to the steward's office herself. Mr. Henry Carlyle, the estate steward, looked up in surprise as she entered. He was a kind-faced man in his mid-30s, with gentle eyes and a quiet competence that had earned him respect. He had always treated Adelaide with genuine courtesy, never with the pity she so dreaded. "Your Grace, what can I do for you?" He set down his ledger. "I want to be of help, Mr. Carlyle. The tenant farms, the village, the charities. Teach me what I need to know. I wish to be the Duchess this estate deserves." Henry studied her for a long moment. Something flickered in his gaze, not pity but a deep recognition. He nodded. "It would be my honor." And so began a quiet transformation. Weeks passed. Adelaide spent her mornings visiting the tenant cottages. She learned the names of every family, the struggles of the harvest, the sickness that swept through the children during the wet months. She organized the repair of leaking roofs and sent broth to the ailing. She listened to the women's worries and brought their concerns directly to the household accounts. The servants began to adore her. The tenants called her the true Lady of Winthorpe. Gabriel noticed none of it. He was often away, writing or locked in his study. When they dined together, the silence stretched so long that Adelaide could hear the ticking of the clock in the hall. She had stopped trying to fill the space with chatter. She answered his brief questions with equal brevity. She no longer lingered, hopping for a glance or a word. She would finish her meal, excuse herself, and retreat to her own world, a world he was not part of. But something began to shift inside the Duke, though he did not yet understand it. One evening he returned from a business trip earlier than expected. The house was quiet, but a soft light glowed from the library. He followed it, expecting to find a forgotten candle. Instead, he saw his wife. Adelaide sat in the corner armchair, a book on agricultural practices open in her lap, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She had not heard him. She was reading aloud softly as if practicing a passage. But she was not alone. At her feet sat the old housemaid's granddaughter, a tiny girl of 6 who had been brought to the hall while her mother worked. The child leaned against Adelaide's knee, eyes wide, listening to the gentle cadence of her voice. Adelaide smiled down at the girl. And so the little lamb found her way home, not because she was strong, but because she was brave enough to ask for help. The child giggled, "Like me when I lost my ribbon." "Exactly like that." Gabriel stood frozen at the threshold. Something sharp twisted in his chest, an emotion he could not name. He had never seen his wife like this. Soft, unaware, radiant with simple kindness. And the child looked at her as if she were the sun. He stepped back silently and walked away. That night he lay awake. The image of Adelaide, so at peace without him, gnawed at his mind. He had thought of her as a quiet, dutiful fixture. He had never considered what she might become if he looked away. A fortnight later, the first real crack appeared. Adelaide had organized a picnic for the village children on the manor grounds. She had not told her husband. There was no need. He rarely concerned himself with such affairs. The day was bright, and laughter echoed across the lawns. Henry Carlyle helped her set up games, his manner easy and warm. The children adored him almost as much as they adored the Duchess. Gabriel, returning from a ride, reined in his horse on the ridge above the lawn. He saw the scene below. His wife, laughing, her hair escaping its pins, as a boy tugged her toward a sack race. And Henry, standing close, saying something that made her tip her head back and smile with a freedom Gabriel had never witnessed. Jealousy struck without warning, hot and unwelcome. He gripped the reins tighter. She was his wife. She had never smiled at him like that. He had never given her a reason to, but seeing another man receive that warmth ignited something possessive and painful deep inside him. He did not go down to the picnic. He turned his horse and rode hard toward the woods, his mind a storm. It was only after an hour of reckless galloping that he finally allowed himself to admit the truth. He was jealous. He, the man who had ignored his wife for over a year, was burning with the fear that he had already lost her. Over the following weeks, Gabriel began to watch Adelaide. It started almost unconsciously. He noticed the way she now moved through the house with quiet confidence, how the servants' faces lit when she entered a room. He saw the fresh cut flowers in the great hall, chosen and arranged by her own hands. He smelled the faint trace of lavender she left behind. He tried to bridge the distance with small gestures. One morning he appeared at breakfast and actually stayed. Adelaide glanced up, surprised, but said nothing. He asked about her plans. She answered politely, but her eyes held a guarded wall. "I thought I might accompany you on your visit to the miller's widow," he said, attempting a casual tone. Adelaide set down her teacup. "That is kind, your grace, but it is not necessary. I am quite capable of managing it alone." "Your grace." The formal address felt like a door closing. He had not realized how deeply he had wounded her until he heard the cool civility in her voice. "I would like to come," he pressed. "As you wish." She gave a brief nod and rose. The distance between them was not a chasm of anger, it was far worse. It was a wall of quiet acceptance that he did not matter. He accompanied her that day, watching as she spoke with the widow, offering comfort and practical help. The woman clutched Adelaide's hand with tearful gratitude. Gabriel stood in the corner, an outsider. The tenants treated him with respect, but they adored his wife. They had seen her in the rain, in the mud, caring for them when he had been locked away in his own grief. That evening, Gabriel dismissed his valet early and sat alone in his study. He stared at the small portrait he kept in a drawer, the face of Lady Marian. He had clung to that image for years, nursing the wound of her betrayal, believing that no woman could ever compare. But as he looked at the painted smile, he felt nothing. The face was cold, distant, a relic of a pain that had long since gone numb. He opened the drawer fully and took out a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Letters Marian had written to him during their engagement. He had read them 100 times, each word a twisted comfort. Tonight, something compelled him to read them again with fresh eyes. He read the first. It was filled with flowery endearments, but the more he read, the more he noticed the hollow ring beneath the pretty words. He read another where she complained about the season's fashions and hinted at a grander life. And then he came upon a letter he had never been able to finish. It was the one she sent ending their engagement. He had stopped at the first cruel line. Now he forced himself to read every word. And his blood turned to ice. "My dear Gabriel, you must forgive me. I have found a match far better suited to my station. The Marquis of Halston has offered for me and I have accepted. Do not blame yourself. You were always too earnest, too devoted. It was rather tiresome, if I am honest. I never loved you. I loved the idea of a duke until a marquis appeared. Do not write. I will not reply." The letter trembled in his hand. Tiresome. She had called his love tiresome. The agony he had carried for years, the devotion he had guarded as sacred, had been nothing but a game to her. The humiliation was absolute, but so was the release. The chains he had forged around his own heart shattered. Gabriel sat motionless for a long time. Then he threw every letter into the fire. He watched them curl and blacken, and with them the ghost of a woman who had never deserved his grief. A new kind of pain took its place. Regret. Deep, gnawing regret for the living woman who had suffered for a ghost. The next day he sought out Henry Carlisle, not out of confrontation, but to ask a simple question. How long has the Duchess been managing these estate visits alone? Henry hesitated, then answered honestly. "Since the 2nd month of your marriage, your grace," she learned quickly. "The tenants have come to rely on her greatly." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "And you have assisted her." "I have been honored to. She has a gift. She saved the Ashby farm from ruin last winter, organized the new well for the village, and personally nursed 3 children through fever when the physician was away." Henry's voice was warm with admiration. Gabriel felt a crushing weight settle on his chest. While he had been locked in his study, staring at a portrait, she had been giving life to his own estate. He had not known. He had not cared to know. "Thank you," he said roughly and walked away. He tried again to reach her that evening. He invited her to dine privately, just the two of them. She accepted with the same serene detachment. The meal was elegant, but the silence felt like a thick fog. He attempted conversation, asking about her day, her interests. She answered briefly, her eyes never quite meeting his. She was courteous, but she no longer offered him anything of her true self. "Adelaide," he finally said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "I have been absent, I know that." She lifted her gaze, and for the first time, he saw the deep well of weariness there, not anger, just exhaustion. "You have been exactly as you chose to be, Your Grace. There is no need to apologize for it. I have made my peace." The calmness of her words cut deeper than any accusation. She had stopped wanting his attention. She had found purpose elsewhere. And now, when he finally wanted to give her everything, she no longer needed it. Panic began to coil in his chest. He reached across the table, his hand almost touching hers. "Can we not begin again? I have been a fool." Adelaide withdrew her hand gently. "It is kind of you to say so, but feelings do not turn on command. I cannot simply forget a year of silence because you have suddenly decided to speak. I need time. I need to trust that this is not another fleeting whim." He watched her walk away, the scent of lavender trailing behind her like a gentle reproach. He had lost her. The woman who had once hoped for his love was gone, and in her place stood a woman who had learned to live without him. The fear of losing her completely became a constant, gnawing presence. He began to notice more sharply the friendship between Adelaide and Henry. The way Henry's eyes followed her, the easy laughter they shared. It was not improper. Henry was too honorable for that, but it was genuine. And it was something Gabriel had never had. One afternoon, he saw them walking together from the village, a basket of herbs in her hand. Henry said something and she smiled, a soft, unguarded smile that made Gabriel's throat constrict. He realized with shattering clarity that if he did not fight for her, another man would, and she might let him. That night he confronted his own heart. He did not want her because she belonged to him. He wanted her because she was the most extraordinary woman he had ever known, and he had been blind. He loved her. He had fallen in love with the invisible woman he had created, and the shame of it nearly broke him. The next morning, a discovery shook the fragile ground beneath him. Gabriel was in the estate office, going through old records to distract himself, when he found a ledger entry from 3 years prior, before their marriage. It noted a large anonymous donation that had saved the estate from bankruptcy after a disastrous harvest. The funds had come through a solicitor, with no name attached. He had always wondered who his mysterious benefactor was. Later that day, as he spoke with his old butler, the man let something slip. "Of course, it was Lady Adelaide's father who arranged it, Your Grace. He insisted on secrecy, but I thought you knew. The funds came from her dowry, sent ahead before the marriage contract was even signed. She begged her father to help the estate because she had heard of the suffering of your tenants." Gabriel felt the world tilt. Adelaide had saved his people long before she ever wore his ring. She had given away a portion of her own future security, in secret, asking for nothing in return. And he had repaid her by making her feel like a stranger in her own home. He found her in the garden, cutting roses. The sun caught the gold in her hair, and her hands moved with graceful precision. She looked up as he approached, her expression carefully neutral. He stopped a few feet away, his voice raw. "You saved my estate before we even met. You asked your father to send the money anonymously." Adelaide's hand stilled. "Who told you? Does it matter? Is it true?" She set down the shears. "Yes, my father mentioned the hardship here. I could not bear the thought of families losing their homes. It was not a grand sacrifice. I did not want thanks." He took a step closer. "You had never even met me. Why would you do such a thing?" Adelaide looked at him then, truly looked. "Because I believed you were a good man. My father spoke of your bravery and honor. I thought that when we married, such kindness might be returned. I was young and foolish." The weight of her words crushed him. He had been given a gift of infinite worth, and he had tossed it aside. "Adelaide," his voice broke, "I have loved a lie for years. The woman I thought I mourned never existed. The woman I should have cherished has been standing beside me unseen. I know I have no right to ask, but I am begging you. Give me a chance to prove that I can be the man you once believed in." She was silent for a long, aching moment. He could see the battle in her eyes, the fear of being hurt again warring with the tiny, stubborn ember of hope she had tried to extinguish. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid that you will wake up tomorrow and decide I am not enough, that you will retreat again, and I will be left with nothing but the memory of this moment." Gabriel closed the distance between them, stopping just before touching her. "I will spend every day for the rest of my life showing you that you are more than enough. I was broken, but you, without even trying, have begun to mend me. If you send me away, I will accept it, but I will never stop loving you, not ever again." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She had not cried since the early days of her marriage. She had taught herself to be strong, to need no one. But here he was, the Duke of Winthorpe, her cold, distant husband, kneeling in the damp grass and looking at her as if she were his last hope. She reached out and touched his face. His eyes closed at the contact, as if in prayer. "I am not the same woman you married," she said softly. "I know, she was a girl who dreamed. You are a woman who has become my home." He took her hand and pressed it to his heart. She could feel the rapid, unsteady beat. "I loved you too late," he confessed, "but I will love you now for as long as I breathe." Slowly, carefully, Adelaide let herself bend toward him. He rose and gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she might shatter. She rested her head against his chest and heard the echo of a heart that had finally, truly, awakened. The healing took time. There were days when the old silence threatened to creep back and she would feel the flicker of doubt. But each time Gabriel was there with a word, a touch, a presence that never wavered. He walked the tenant farms with her, learning their names. He sat with her in the library while she read, content simply to be near her. He filled the house not with grand gestures but with 1,000 small ones that whispered, "You are seen." And one golden autumn evening, as they stood together on the terrace overlooking the valley, Adelaide slipped her hand into his. He turned and looked at her with an expression of such profound tenderness that she finally believed it. "I am no longer invisible," she said. "You never were," he answered, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I was blind. Thank you for waiting until I could see." She smiled, and in that smile was the quiet, deep peace of a woman who had found not just a husband, but a partner. The sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and the Duke of Winthorpe held his wife close, knowing that he had been given a second chance at a love he nearly lost, a love that would now sustain them both for all the days to come.